Welcome everyone to the PJ's Cast. I'm your host Pierce, alongside of my usual co-host Dylan, and making his yearly appearance is Scott Powers of the Athletic. How's it going, Scott?
Good, guys. How you guys doing? Thanks for having me.
Doing great, doing
Doing all
great.
right. It's a great time in Chicago sports right now.
Yeah, pretty good, huh?
So at this time last year, Blackhawks weren't doing well, and it was at a point again where like, oh, they're getting another top 3 pick. I remember we had the discussion of, is Seth Jones going to be traded? And I think all of us were like, oh, maybe in the off season. And like a month and a half later, not even, you request a trade, and then short order he gets traded to Florida. And a trade, I would say that's worked out great for both sides. Seth Jones immediately goes and wins a cup in Florida, and the Hawks have seemingly found their franchise goaltender. And here we are a year later, no Seth Jones on the team, but this team has gotten way better, especially compared to the last couple years. Not that it's a super high bar, but yeah, it's nice to have you on and not just being all doom and gloom and here's another top 3 pick. It's actually nice to talk about this team is closer to a playoff spot than they are at the bottom of the barrel, but I think that more speaks to the loser point, the Bettman point in the NHL. But yeah, it's been surprising, this Blackhawks team. All the young players have stepped up. Connor Bedard has just put himself into superstardom, and it's good that they have him back again. But my first question is maybe the biggest surprise, at least to me, for the Blackhawks is Louis Crevier. I think he was originally thought to be the 7th D-man, especially if you look at the right side. I think we penciled in Lev Shunoff, Rinzel, and Murphy, and that just goes to speak anything can happen in an NHL season. Do you think the Blackhawks view Louis Crevier as a long-term piece of the puzzle? Or I always go back to this trade in the summer. Might they view him as a Michael Kesselring to potentially get a bigger trade for a younger player? Because I think my thing with the Blackhawks is they don't have a lot of guys that are in their mid-20s, because teams don't want to just trade for draft picks. They want to get young, ready NHL talent. So do you think the Blackhawks view Louis Crevier as a long-term piece, or do you think they might want to sell high on him this summer?
Yeah, I think you need to read a lot into the trade for Ryan Ellis's contract. I think that's pretty, and it's a pretty good indicator that anyone who thinks the Blackhawks are going to make a big trade this summer or add someone substantial, it's probably not going to happen. Like it's possible maybe someone becomes available. I don't think the Blackhawks are going to move assets, players that could potentially become something right now. Danny Wirtz is giving them all the patience. Fans are happy. Like I don't think. I know everyone wants to accelerate it, but I don't think Kyle Davidson has any reason to right now. So I don't think he will. So I think Louis Crevier at his age, he's under contract for another year. Then a restricted free agent again. I think he's a long-term piece. I think a larger sample size will tell us a little bit more. I think ultimately Louis Crevier is a nice story. Like but I think at the end of the day, he's probably still a 5'6" defenseman. Like I think he can make a piece of the puzzle. Like you want him paired with someone who's very defensive and for the Blackhawks to succeed, they need Levshunov and Rinzel and all these guys, Kaiser, to be really good defensemen and two-way defensemen, guys who can put up points. I think Krevier's, I think he's exceeded all expectations. But to me, I mean, this story, the season just feels like it's Connor Bedard. Like the Blackhawks aren't. None of this is possible unless Connor Bedard takes that step, right? Like, yeah, if Connor Bedard is a really nice player, that's fine. I think the Blackhawks need to build like the Carolina Hurricanes and then it's about quantity, not as much quality. But if Connor Bedard is this player, he's a superstar, he's everything that people wanted, then I think people can get really excited about what's coming, what's here. I think the puzzle's created in a whole different way if you have that superstar, that hard caliber player. So I think that was so key. And obviously Spencer Knight too. I mean, Spencer Knight looks like he's a legit number one. His metrics have come down to earth, and some of that's with a young team and some inconsistencies. I don't know what his ceiling is, but he's still pretty young. But I think a lot of teams you've seen that you don't necessarily need that number one elite goalie to be good. And I think the Blackhawks are putting together a puzzle where if Spencer Knight's that guy, then terrific. But I think so much of it is based on what Bedard is, and now like you think Nazar is something, Lardis is proving something, Moore is showing something. Frondell's on that trajectory, Kansarov's on the trajectory. And if Luc Crevier steps in and certainly looks like he can be that guy, I think it answers one more question. I think them trading Nolan Allen, it sort of was another reason that kind of points to how they feel about Crevier. Nolan Allen was going to be on waivers. His waiver exemption would have been gone next season. So I think that they saw him as a piece that they probably wasn't permanently here long term. So I think Crevier is a really nice story, and it's all likelihood probably a piece of the long-term puzzle. I think we'll know more, the fact they have another year of his contract to kind of figure that out, but he's been handling more and more ice time and getting more opportunity and, playing more of a shutdown pair, especially with Vlasic, which I think that's how they ultimately envision those two guys to play, where you have, Kaiser and Levshunov playing a little bit more, probably a little bit of both, playing offense and defense, and then whomever Rinzel's paired with probably gets a little bit more slanted offensively. But yeah, again, it's putting it all together, a big puzzle, and you have the big piece in Bedard, and then trying to figure out where the rest go. And right now, they seem to be shaping up in the Blackhawks direction.
I mean, the fact you got a 7th-round pick from 2020 out of all drafts to play NHL games is a home run pick, and now that he's kind of seems like he's a main fixture in that lineup now. I can't remember the exact stats, and I honestly can't remember who tweeted it, but I remember just stumbling upon it that since him and Vlasic have been together the last 10 or 15 games or whatever, they've been facing the hardest competition while also having very above 50% expected goal share, Corsi, and all that stuff. So, Dylan, I'm going to hand the floor to you now.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, you mentioned, Connor Bedard kind of uplifts the team right now, and he's made a lot of players better than they are. I mean, you look at, Tyler Bertuzzi's obviously stepped his game up, but, he's not paced for 40-plus goals this year, and Connor Bedard's a big part of that. Andre Burakovsky's having a great year. But the one I wanted to talk about is Ryan Green, who surprisingly had very good chemistry with Bedard. I think his playmaking, I didn't realize was as good as it is. Obviously, the finishing was there. He probably has 7 or 8 goals right now, but he gets his chances, and it seems Jeff Blashill definitely trusts him. When Bedard was out, he was playing top line center, or at least getting the top line assignment with Burakovsky. I just kind of want to know, how do you think the organization views Ryan Green going forward? Because I think Pierce and I both agree that he could be an excellent bottom 6 center for this team, but clearly the coach trusts him with the top 6 upside. So I just kind of I'm curious what you think.
Yeah, I think he's a little bit more offensive upside than Kruger. Maybe not the defensive, Marcus Kruger is one of the best PKers and defensive centers, but I also think Ryan Green has a higher offensive upside than Marcus Kruger. I don't know. I think he's definitely an NHL piece. I think he's proven that, and that's key here for him to come in. The Blackhawks wanted him to sign 2 years ago, and he turned them down to go back to BU. So he's a little bit older than the other guys, but I think the fact that he didn't have to go to Rockford, obviously he was headed to Rockford at the start of the season. They were hoping that he was going to be sort of closer to the NHL than a lot of these guys because of his age and the fact that he did go back to BU, but I think he still exceeded expectations, and certainly as they were putting together this lineup, certainly I forgot who started on the top line day one, but maybe Donato, Bedard, and Burakovsky. They've sort of, Jeff Blashill won a lot of different ways and then finally figured out this thing. And I don't even know if Ryan Green was really excelling that much before then. It felt like he was treading water and he was fine in the NHL. But I felt like once he got with Connor Bedard, it was able to showcase other parts of his game, and certainly his intelligence and he knows where to put himself. He knows where to put the puck. He does a lot of things that complement Connor Bedard and intelligent and skilled players. Over time, I don't know. We'll see. There's plenty of examples and throughout the league where superstars have just clicked with someone. I mean, Chris Kunitz played with Sidney Crosby for
made the
long
Olympics.
Time. Yeah, and Chris Kunitz was a really nice player, but I don't think anyone anticipated that. So, we'll see what in the long term where Ryan Green fits, and maybe. If he shows enough and he's this perfect complement to Connor Bedard, I don't think that can be ignored. But the Blackhawks certainly have higher offensive players, ceiling players. I mean, Frondell and Kanserov, and certainly, I mean, you see with Nick Lardis and a lot of these players, Nestrasil and down the line, Nacker. You have a whole, there's a whole another group of offensive players coming, and do they complement Bedard better? Certainly Bertuzzi having 2 more years of the contract, Burakovsky having another year. They fill some holes for the next couple of years, and then I think over the next couple of seasons, it's sort of patching it together and figuring out what works in the short term. I think you could put in Frondell and Kanserov into the lineup next year. I think that's a pretty safe bet. Do one of those guys potentially click with Bedard or Nazar or whomever? So I think there's a lot of there's a lot of moving parts that they'll sort of figure out. But the fact that Ryan Green has played this well at this age, if he continues to I think hone his defensive skills and have that offensive upside. And I think that certainly he looks like someone who could be. I think with his offensive IQ, like it makes more sense on a third line role in the long term. But again, I guess when you look at the fourth line, it depends on how it's comprised. Is it Spellacy and Savoie, or is it a Slaggert or Doc or whomever? And what are those guys' offensive upsides? But there's always a chance for Ryan Green. He's a guy who really clicks with Connor Bedard, and they find another really good offensive piece, and that's just where it is, But you would assume that Connor Bedard continues to elevate his game, and if Ryan Green can figure out the finishing a little bit, and he's a 20-goal scorer, like I think whoever plays with Connor Bedard needs to be a 20-goal scorer. Like he's that elite of a passer. He's going to create a lot of chances. I think you want a line that has Bedard, who's at 30 to 50 goals, and then you have 2 20-goal scorers. Like I think you want Ryan Green being able to capitalize on those chances. So in time we'll see. I think it's early to say what he is offensively, and I think him getting those chances says a lot, and often that's the hard part. Whether he can I guess improve those skills and figure it out. I think he's young. There's time. I think that, getting with a skills coach this summer, I think a lot of that work's done, whether it's, just reworking his shots or doing something different. Like he's never been a big offensive player. But now you have the time and certainly the focus to maybe concentrate on things you haven't early in your career. He's established himself enough in NHL where I think you know what you're going to get. If you can get more, then the sky's the limit. So I think the positive is that Ryan Green should have been this good this early on, and you can you can envision him in a lot of different spots. It just depends on what the rest of the prospects coming behind him look like.
The point I wanted to agree with the most is he's such a smart player. You talked about he finds the open areas on the ice, and it's such a key when you have a center like Bedard, because that's a guy who's going to create his own space. So you got to find a spot to get open. And we used to talk about it for years. Alex DeBrincat and Patrick Kane had that chemistry. If Kane's over here, DeBrincat knows where the soft spot of the ice is. I feel like Ryan Green is finding that a little bit, especially over the last 2 months. And like you said, if he works on his finishing this offseason, maybe goes and trains with Bedard all summer, see how that wrist shot, work down the science on that. Like you said, I think he gets enough chances where he could very easily be a 20-goal scorer. I feel like I always find him around the net. He's making the smart play out of the defensive zone. Like you said, his defensive game can be better, but they're all 21, 22. He's 22, I think. So he's got time to grow. But I look at the Sharks and they got a player like Colin Graff, who I think is 23. And he's become a pretty good mixed player for that team, showing offense and, contributing in some points. And he looks like he's going to be playing more of a bottom 6 role for them too. So if he could be that piece for the team, it gives you a lot of flexibility. And, Davidson said it for years. He wants a lot of guys who can play center and wings. So it's nice that he can get in the dot too.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with that.
We've mentioned his name a couple times so far. I think the most intriguing prospect in the Blackhawks system right now is Roman Kanserov, because he's just flat out one of the best players in Russia and outside of the NHL right now. Do you think there is any doubts of him? Like, Do you think he's on the Blackhawks come next season? Because he is leading the charge for Metallurg Magnitogorsk, and they're probably going to win a Gagarin Cup or go on a deep playoff run. So I think any chance of him playing before the end of the year is pretty much zero. But do you think we see him come October 2026 in a Blackhawks uniform?
Yeah, everything that I know and heard, I think that he'll be here. I think until he's signed, there's no, the Blackhawks will, I'm sure they won't be fully confident. You never know what happens with some of these players. I think there's incentive to sign sooner than later. I think you want to get to that second contract. I think that's such a key in the NHL is, especially Kanserov. I think the way he's performed, he's going to get a nice entry level deal, have some bonuses in there. I think, I think there's, I think him and his agent probably realize that, for him to get paid, it's to come to North America sooner than later and get to that second deal, and then certainly he gets his money. So I don't. Yeah, I mean, for everything I've talked with him and his people in the Blackhawks, like everything points to him signing with the Blackhawks. Obviously, I'm sure Metallurg has tried to re-sign him, and he's been offered deals over there. He obviously hasn't agreed to one. I think it's helped that they won one cup with them, and obviously they're headed in another direction, but potentially another one. I think his success over there, helps them. I don't think Russia holds players back necessarily, or they certainly want to keep them as long as they can. But I think it also helps Russia when their players are playing, in the NHL and succeeding, and I think it helps their reputation too. So I don't know. I mean, I think it's it's a little bit from team by team basis to how restrictive or how controlling they want to be, and I'm sure. I'm sure Metallurg would love to have Kanserov as long as he has, but he's been pretty loyal. He signed that extension before. He decided to do some of his major developing years in Russia rather than in Rockford. So I think that was key too. So I think he's been a pretty loyal player to them, and he's obviously produced, and the Blackhawks have to be very happy with his development, how it's come along in the KHL. So I think it's worked out for all sides, and now I assume that Kanserov will be in Chicago until it's done. Obviously, I think there's probably a little bit unease with the Blackhawks just not knowing, but I think every indication, him coming to Russia or coming to Chicago 2 years ago for development camp and bringing his dad, I think those are all positive signs too. Where he's everything that he's been asked of from the Blackhawks, and he gets on phone calls with Kendall Coyne Schofield, and he does a lot of even during his own season, he's doing Blackhawks developmental work. So he's been very engaged with the process and want to be part of the future. And the fact that I've interviewed him twice over the last 2 years, and he's always open to that too. So I think I think a lot of players, he wants to play in the NHL and do well, and a long-winded answer, but I do think he's in Chicago next season.
Yeah, I've seen just on Twitter like him doing interviews with a Russian journalist, and I think I read one that came out last week that basically the hockey way of saying, yeah, I'm coming to Chicago, but I don't want to jinx anything. Chicago has been good to me in the process. And I think the most telling thing to me is that because there's a lot of politics in the KHL, the fact that he's a 21-year-old and they've given him an A and they're playing him at center as well. Not that I think he'll be a center at the NHL, just from what I hear, but you never know. Again, you like that flexibility and versatility, but yeah, I think he's coming over. I think the Russian factor, if it was ever really a thing, especially this last decade, it feels like all the top Russian players want to come over. They want to come over early too, like Demidov, Michkov, and even if you do have to wait a few years for it, we've seen the payoff can be great with Kaprizov, or if you can even go back to guys like Vladimir Tarasenko and Evgeny Kuznetsov. And yeah, Roman Kanserov spending a couple of years, or I think it's 3 years in Russia since he's been drafted and coming to Chicago. And I think he's going to get every opportunity to play in the top six and potentially play with Connor Bedard coming out of training camp.
Yeah, no,
And
definitely. I think, I think the Blackhawks are going to try to sell him on an opportunity. Like he's not coming over here to play in Rockford. If that was the case, I think he'd stay in Russia.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I think he's opened the eyes a little bit to what his potential is. I think the Blackhawks have always liked him, but for him to be producing at this level in the KHL, I think it's opened their eyes a little bit to his potential and where he fits. I think he'll get a run with a lot of different players, but certainly they yeah, I think it's I think between him and Frondell, I think they both find very offensive spots and spots up in the lineup next season.
we talk about this prospect pool, and there's a lot of great stories going on with the pool. We just talked about Frondell and Canceroff. You have obviously Levshinov's development over the last 18 months has really been something to watch. And but there's been some
Sure has
prospects that
been.
have had their bumps in the road. And one of the first ones that this fan base got the privilege of seeing was Kevin Korchinski, who, obviously with the circumstances with the WHL, he had to play in the NHL his full year as a 19-year-old, which probably wasn't beneficial towards his development, but that's the reality of the situation. And he's kind of found himself going back and forth from Rockford the last 2 years. I know he's been playing big minutes down there, but what do you think happens with Kevin Korchinski? Because as of right now, there's maybe one or two spots of the decor that are up for grabs, at least until the offseason. And you look at guys like Matt Grzelcyk, who have just been so steady on the back end. It's going to be hard for him to crack the lineup. Like it took three defensemen getting sick this week for him to get called up. So I just kind of was curious, what do you think the organization's view is on him and his development? Because he's still a young 21-year-old. I think he turned 22 this year? Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
22 in June, I think. Yeah.
mhm.
Um,
Yeah, he's still young.
yeah, I think they're going to be patient. The other development of the other defensemen's allowed them to be patient. I think Levshinov's come along probably quicker than they thought. Um, you know, I think for Levshinov to spend as little time in Rockford as he had to, I think that was a positive, and certainly Renzel seemed like he might not need to spend any time in Rockford, but obviously took a step back and went through some of his professional growing pains early this season. Um, yeah, Mark Lazarus and I had this conversation yesterday on the podcast, ours, and we discussed what where Kuczynski's at, where whether playing him in the NHL at 19, whether it had a detriment to his development and all these different factors, and it's hard to say now. Like you're a few years beyond that, and it's not like they've kept him in the NHL. They've taken a step back, and he's played a lot of time in Rockford. So I don't think a full season in the NHL was maybe it was a negative at the time where it accelerated what he was expected to do, but I don't think it should be a crutch for where his development is. I think he's I think his body's developing and like he's learning different parts of his game and trying to figure out what he is as an NHL player. And certainly he was the guy there for a while, and he's been jumped over by Levshinov and possibly Renzel, and all of a sudden he doesn't like that. He's not the top, like I think everyone thought he was gonna be the top guy in the power play and all these things, and now he's sort of fighting for a spot. So I'm sure that's been a little bit of a just some mind gymnastics there for him to do. And I think it's been really challenging. I think I think the Blackhawks are going to remain patient, and they can be. I don't think he has large trade value at this point, and he doesn't have to go through waivers for another season. So if we'll see what he comes back with. I think they still want him to be a little bit thicker and a little bit stronger. And a lot of that work's done in the offseason, certainly getting the ice time they want him to be really aggressive, and maybe he does play more of a sheltered role, like a Nick Leddy type, if eventually.
That's what I was thinking.
But
Yeah,
I think it's early to say. I think the rest of the season he spends a lot of time in Rockford. I think the Blackhawks potentially trade Connor Murphy, depending on what the offers are. Maybe they trade Matt Grzelcyk. I don't. I don't know where the Blackhawks are in the standings. I don't think they tear down it, and they don't really need to. But they also want to create some spots. I think Frondell could be over here, over in March, depending on how your garden season ends. There's a slight chance that Canceroff comes over. I think whether it's Renzel or Korchinski, I think they'd like to give them a little bit of run in the NHL again late in the season. Injuries, yeah, the fact that they've been as healthy as they have been, it's a little rare. So you never know. It's a very condensed schedule over here for the next month. So maybe injuries do pile up, and you have Delmas for Renzel, Krasinski. They're probably waiting to get called up and get some opportunity. So yeah, I think all the Blackhawks can do now is you continue to, you put the time into his development. You give him as much opportunity as you can in Rockford. Him and Renzel are playing 20 plus minutes, sometimes 25 plus minutes. And it's, yeah, I don't know if his role is necessarily that in the NHL. So it's adjusting. So maybe this, like he doesn't necessarily have to be that consistent for that long. But I think what they want him to do is just trying to be the player as much as he can. They want him to be as aggressive and every shift go out there and obviously be defense reliable, but you also need to play to your strengths. No one's expecting Kevin Korchinski to be a shutdown defenseman, but they want him to be they have some offense on it, be able to complement the, like you have that much skill among the future forwards. Like you want to be a defenseman who gets involved and then he can create that. So I think they continue to want him to play those strengths. And so yeah, we'll see. We'll see. I don't know if Kevin Korchinski makes it. I don't think the Blackhawks know at this point. I think all they realize is that they obviously drafted him pretty high, so there's some higher expectations. But the fact that Renzel pans out and Levshunov, and there's not as much pressure for Kaczynski to be that player, which also allows them to sit back and see what it becomes. I mean, there's plenty of examples of defensemen who've needed more time. I mean, from Gustav Forslings to down the line, there are guys who spent a lot of time in the American League and eventually figured out as defensemen later on. And Kaczynski has a lot of skills that. The reasons that he was drafted really high, just whether they materialize as NHL level. I think it's probably hard to say definitively at this point.
And the organization's already shown patience with, Wyatt Kaiser. I feel like he had kind of the same trajectory for the last couple of years where, he tried to earn the spot out of camp in 2023, went down to Rockford for a couple of years. And then I feel like once he got called up, I forget if it was last February or March, but I feel like he started to find a role in the lineup after that. And now he's become a very critical part of that defense for Jeff Blashill. So patient, like this organization does preach patience. You're right. And, it helps when you have done this full teardown. It's going to take time, and it's not something they're not expected to win the Stanley Cup right now. So if that was the case, trajectories might get rushed, but they're a couple years off from that, so you can be patient.
I think part of it too is, you look at Kaiser and Velasquez. These are guys who are who spent three plus years in college. Then Velasquez another year in Rockford, and Kaiser a couple of years bouncing back and forth. Like they're a couple of years ahead of where Korchinski is now. So I think that's the normal trajectory for a defenseman. Like with a seventh overall pick, like the expectations are a little bit higher, and certainly you're seeing that with Levshunov. As high as he was picked too. I think there's certainly some players who make it and figure out earlier, and Korchinski seems to be one who needs a little bit more time. And that's not to say that he's going to make it, but I think that his trajectory, it does seem more fitting to some of those players who do need time, and you have a lot of components of his game that could work. And the Blackhawks still sit back and figure out if they eventually do come out. But I think the next few years, like, you'll have a better idea. Like, it's not, I think his waivers and all that sort of stuff comes into play eventually. And this is when he gets in year 4 or 5 of being a pro, like, there's a different kind of a conversation to be had. But right now they can sort of wait and see what he develops into over the next few seasons.
Definitely.
I can't help but think with Kevin Korchinski how beneficial when he was drafted, the CHL NCAA agreement was in place where he could have gone from Seattle to college. I think that would have helped him out a lot, maybe spending a year or two there and then heading to Chicago. I do have a couple more questions before we let you go, Scott. First one being is, what have you thought of Oliver Moore and Nick Lardis being on the team? Because neither of them were on the team to start the year, and I've been pleasantly surprised by them, especially Nick Lardis, because I feel Oliver Moore has more translatable skills to the NHL. Like, I think he's going to be an NHL player. It's just a matter of how high the offensive upside is. Whereas with Nick Lardis, I think there is a bit of boom or bust element to him, but I think he's looked the part of an NHL player so far, and I think his shot is definitely going to play. I think I remember you putting in an article this summer. They said the Blackhawks want him to be like Jake Gensel. So yeah, I just want to hear your thoughts on Oliver Moore and Nick Lardis.
Yeah, I think with Oliver Moore, you knew the speed was definitely going to translate. I think he's still figuring out how to use that speed, and it'll continue to kind of evolve, and we'll see what he's another player. I think he could fall into a lot of different places in the lineup. But as a forechecker, as someone who could potentially have that breakaways, breakaway ability. I think there's, obviously he's worked on his finishing, and that was something that he really put a lot of time into. So, yeah, I'm curious of where Oliver Moore fits in. I think there's he's a really intriguing piece. It's just who does he complement and who complements him, sort of thing. But yeah, I think he's trending in a great direction, especially early on. Nick Lardis, just having watched him enough over the last few years, and I don't think you score that many goals in a league, and not have, I think there was, because he's a little bit undersized. I think that there's always this question, and we saw this with Alex DeBrincat too, where um, I think there's certain players when you have that sort of scoring ability, and you're doing it at such a high rate that eventually it's going to translate. I think that certainly he needs to be more physical, and he needs to add some weight, and some of that'll come now that he's under more of a pro schedule and that sort of direction. But yeah, I think the way that he thinks the game, and the way that I think he can adjust, and I think even last year in the OHL, I felt like he was scoring different types of goals. So he was mindful of trying to create more, pro type goals. And I think you saw that in Rockford, where he kind of popped at a high rate early on. And now starting to figure out in the NHL, and having players like Bedard and Nazar, and, the fact that he's played 2 games with Bedard, and so little with Nazar, I think you're going to see his ability even shine more, where you have guys who are used to playing with elite players too, and being able to find Lardis. I think that'll lead to more opportunities, and certainly, I think, yeah, just sort of that play off the last game where Bedard finds him. I think you'll see that type of thing, because I do think Lardis is very intelligent about where to put himself and find that ice, and understands. He understands sort of the context of situations, and knows how to play them out. So I think there was an adjustment period, and some of it was there wasn't a ton of players probably complimenting him early on when he first arrived at Blackhawks. I think he needs someone who can distribute to him a little bit, and I think that Green more Lardis line was really interesting, but also probably a little too inexperienced to shine in the NHL. Like something like that might in the future might be really interesting, but I don't know if it was there were reasons why it wasn't effective early on. But I think Nick Lardis, like Moore, I think the more time they spend in the NHL, the better they're going to get. And I think you're already seeing that over a few weeks, where they're getting more comfortable, and they're understanding NHL situations, and patterns and that type of thing. And it does play a little bit differently than the American League. So I think Lardis has made a really nice, him and Moore both been very smooth transitions, and I not that it's always going to be a upward climb, but I do think both will get better with the more time they spend in the NHL.
And then my last question here is, best forward outside of number 98 has been Tyler Bertuzzi. And not that I even want this to happen, but do you think we might hear Tyler Bertuzzi's names in trade rumors in the next month or so? Or do you think the Blackhawks just want to keep him? I think both Dylan and I want them to keep Bertuzzi, but do you think there's a chance we'll hear his name? And do you think they'll listen on him?
It would have to be for someone who's part of the long-term future, right? Like it's like a Jason Robertson type, or someone who the Blackhawks aren't going to trade Tyler Bertuzzi for draft picks at this point. The Blackhawks don't need any more draft picks. It's going to get, even now with as many picks as they get, it's going to get complicated here in the coming years of who to sign, and the potential people not signing because they don't want to be in the the backlog of the Blackhawks prospects. And I think there's some issues with that. So I don't think the Blackhawks are really driven by draft picks. I think an established NHLer who could complement someone would intrigue them. But I mean, who's actually doing that if you're trading that for Tyler Bertuzzi, like Tyler Bertuzzi is a really nice player and can be part of a winning team. But I don't think you're giving up a player that would be in the heart of his career, that for that deal. So I mean, the fact that Bertuzzi's got that much term left, and there's no reason that maybe in that final season, depending on what the roster looks like, maybe maybe Bertuzzi's. But at that point too, I mean, 3 years from here, with 2 more years, like you think the Blackhawks are a playoff team, and Tyler Bertuzzi, if he's you're not necessarily a top liner, but the fact that if he's still in the mix there and producing, then he's someone who could, I don't think they extend him at any point, but someone who would help them win. Like I don't think it's I don't think it'd be off to say that Tyler Bertuzzi could be on the Blackhawks when they start turning this corner and becoming a more winning team. And obviously they're sort of doing that now, but you would think over the next 2 years that his contract, during his contract, the Blackhawks take further steps. So I in the short term, no, I don't think so. In the long term, we'll see. But in the long term, I think Bertuzzi's role changes and what he means to this team changes. But that could also be a very nice piece to what they're putting together for trying to win over the next couple seasons.
Yeah, I mean, he's on pace for, I think, 45 goals. He's scoring at a 45 goal pace. I feel this is the first time in the Kyle Davidson regime that they've had, I wouldn't say an elite winger, but definitely a winger who's scoring at an elite level. So, yeah, I don't want them to trade him. I was just kind of curious.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I don't think so.
Yeah, we're in the camp of keeping him for sure. Plus, like the versatility to put him through the top 9 when the kids come up, I feel like is priceless.
I think he can
The
play
game he
anywhere
brings.
too, and he's just
Mhm.
like he was dragging this team into the fight while Bedard was gone.
Yeah, I mean, he
Oh.
won that Vegas game by himself. So, but last question. We always appreciate you coming on, Scott.
Yeah,
We
no problem.
appreciate
Thanks
your
for having me.
time. But there's always the elephant in the room, and I feel like most Blackhawk fans, it's Connor Bedard's extension. Obviously, those talks have been quiet during the season, and the injury probably put a spike in things. But I think Pierce and I are in the camp just give him a blank check. Like he's worth so much to this franchise, and you have all this cap space next year. But if you had to guess a number, where do you think that lands for him?
It depends if it's a short or long term, right? Like if it's a 3-year deal, it looks different than an 8-year deal or a 7-year deal. Yeah, I don't know. I assume it's somewhere in the 12 to 15 range. I think the Blackhawks aren't going to say no to him necessarily. I do think they want some negotiation. They don't want that number to be too high. I think they want the puzzle to fall in, again, going back to this puzzle analogy, but he's going to be the person who makes the most money in the Blackhawks probably for the entirety of his career. So they want to have that where it's at a place where it's it's reasonable for. I think the Blackhawks are going to be unique to have this many first round picks and this many players coming on to 2nd-year deals and third deals as the cap's going up too. So it all has to be sort of fit together, and it'll be interesting to see what Renzel and Moore and those guys want, and certainly Levshinov's contract's not too far around the corner, but you get Bedard done, and then whether it's 12, 15, whatever it is, and then you sort of kind of figure out what you have left for the other players, and I guess what remains to be seen is if the Blackhawks are a cap ceiling team. Are they going to spend to the cap? Danny Wirtz has sort of talked around it, saying that they've always been so, and if it's justified, he thinks they will be. I think, I'm curious to see what the reality is that when it's all said and done, and certainly getting Connor Bedard at a reasonable number probably helps manage the bigger picture, and then certainly working out other contracts in the coming years. So I don't know. I do think 12 to 15 million makes like it's I think Connor Bedard is justified to ask for 20 million. I think I think it's the cap is going to be exceeding 100 million. What he means to this team on and off the ice. Certainly carried the organization the last 2 years, even through ticket sales, not necessarily a superstar player, but really good at 18, 19 years old, and the only player they were really able to market there for a while. And now it's obviously he's taken it to another level, and they have more stars coming, which helps build the brand as a whole, and they can sell more jerseys of other players. But certainly Connor Bedard's still going to this is the reason that people are going to pay for the price and come into the door, and makes the Blackhawks a lot more relevant nationally and locally and all those things. So I think Connor Bedard's justified, and especially with his play, that he can ask for anything. But I think also Connor Bedard, it's he's going to get his during his time, whether through endorsements or over the long term of his career. He's going to get his money. I think um, I think he's going to be mindful to an extent of what's realistic for him to get, and then what does that mean to the Blackhawks as a whole? Will that mean they're, like he wants to win a cup like any player? I think he's competitive, and he doesn't want to be the reason, his salary to be something that holds him back. And I think I'm sure the Blackhawks will sell it to him a little bit, like it's, you take this and everything else is a little bit easier. But I think Connor Bedard should get whatever he wants, and then the Blackhawks sort of need to figure out the rest. Like I think he needs to be selfish in some respect, because I do think he can take on a really large number, and the Blackhawks still figure this out. So I think his whatever makes him happy at the end of the day, like that's the number that should be in. This is the number I'm comfortable with, and never him saying I'm being underpaid or I'm not being valued enough. So I think he should figure out what that number is for him, and then take it to the Blackhawks. 'Cause I don't think they'll have I don't think they can argue it a whole lot. Like they don't want it coming out that they're negotiating too much with Bedard. I think they want to sell their story of Bedard makes everything else easier for the long term plan here. But it's I don't know, 12 to 15 seems fair, but again, it depends on if it's short term, long term. If the Blackhawks can tie up Connor Bedard for a long term deal, then obviously there's a little bit more money on the table that they owe him, and that cap's only going to continue to go up. So I at this point I think it happens after the season. I don't think it happens. Again, I could be wrong, but I mean, everything that's been indicated to me that I think it's something that happens in the off season. So it'll happen. It's just, people just need to be a little bit patient. They'll get there.
Definitely. I think it's just or at least from my perspective personally, I'm of the belief that I think him and Celebrini, these are the two biggest upcoming contracts in the league. Obviously, McDavid's was till this point, but they're setting the pace for what a 21-year-old at a superstar pace is going to make. And, for the benefit of Celebrini and Bedard, they don't have, like, Matthews had a Marner that was getting paid at the same time. McDavid's had a Draisaitl get paid at the same time. McKinnon's had Makar and Rantanen.
Yeah.
There's no Robin yet to take up a bunch of cap space. So, like you said, that's why Pierce and I are in the camp of a blank check, and I feel like the Sharks should do the same with Celebrini. It's like there's not another player that's going to make over 10 mil on this team anytime soon, at least to our knowledge right now, as of January 11th or 12th. But and that should be a part of the negotiation. So I'm just curious how it goes, because players like this, they should be making, I think, north of 15. Like especially if you're signing more than 4 or 5 years, that contract should be north of 15. So
yeah, I think part of it, I think teams need to get comfortable with where the cap's at. Like, I think they still want to negotiate a lot where the cap was. I think I think there's some owners who are uneasy about where the cap's going. Like it's certainly one, they're business people and they like to make money. Two, it's having to sign larger checks. It's I think there's an adjustment period that's still happening in the league, and trying a lot of it's done usually by percentage, like even when Sidney Crosby signed that, I know Sidney Crosby gets a lot of credit for, 8.7 million. But the first time that he signed 8.7 million, I think it was 15% of the cap.
It was a big percentage of the cap. Yeah.
And they came down percentage is when McDavid signed his. I know that.
Yeah. So I like 15% of Bedard is, it's over 15 million. Where are we at then? Would be 15, a little bit, maybe 16 million
15
almost.
And a half, maybe.
Yeah. So it's not unheard of. So I guess I'd be surprised if it's at that. I think it falls a little bit under that, but he's completely justified if he wanted to. Like, there's plenty of examples of players on second deals getting that amount for the type of player that he's developing into. So, I'd be a little shocked if it ends up at 16 or 15-ish. But yeah, I think that's maybe. But again, if it's long term, then Blackhawks they should pay that in a second. So, it'll be interesting to see. If I'm Connor Bedard, I'm signing a 3-year deal and taking what I can get and coming
all
back in 3
NHL
years.
players.
I think we were in the camp of he probably signs 4 or 5, just because you don't know where the cap is in 5 years, and if you sign your next contract at 25, you're gonna make so much money.
For sure. Yeah.
Man.
Yeah, and then there's player and player. I mean, a guy like Frandell comes in and in 3 years he's gonna want his too. Like I think I think at some point it's going to be challenging if the cap keeps on increasing. Trying to make sure that everyone's sort of slotted in and everyone's comfortable where their numbers are, and that's a good problem to have. Certainly Kane and Taves were a rarity in that they were both willing to accept the same number, and it never became an issue. But who's to say if Kanserov and Frondel, and it certainly helps that Nazar took a little bit less than what he could potentially have made. And who knows? I mean, based on his season, like it's obviously the injury and his production probably isn't. Like we can probably argue whether he gets the same deal after this year or not. But at the time, it felt like a pretty safe bet for the Blackhawks, and Nazar obviously was taking some stability. But I think as the Blackhawks add more of these players and seeing how they produce, like how quickly do they want to get paid and where do they want to paid, and certainly Bedard will. I think you want to have Bedard high enough where he's definitively the top player, but I think the Blackhawks also don't want him too high where it becomes less manageable to put the whole pie together. So I think it's a really intriguing conversation, and I'm sure both sides internally right now are trying to figure out what's best, and certainly Bedard will get a say too. I'm sure his agents are like, yeah, just go for as much as you can. But
take it to the moon.
I think Bedard will. I think his desire to win, it'll probably be part of the puzzle too, as he decides on what he wants and whether it's short or long term. So definitely, it's a really fun conversation, and it'll be interesting to see how it plays out.
I found it funny that you brought up Sidney Crosby 8.7 because I feel a lot of hockey players just like to put their jersey number in their contracts. And one thing I've always said, like before the season, the Blackhawks should offer Bedard 98 over 8, which is 12.25. But with the way he's playing this year, I think that's kind of out of the question now. But I think a comparison for me might be Jack Eichel. I think he's got 13.5 over 8. Like I don't think he's going to go over the 15 mil. So I think of that number.
But again, Jack Eichel's like his contract was signed over a different cap, like the percentage of his, I think, I mean, maybe the sweet spot's over 14 million. Like it's, I think Bedard should make more than Jack Eichel on his second deal. Not based on play necessarily, but based on where the cap is. Like the cap should determine some of this. Like the owners need to get comfortable allowing just paying players more. It's always been based on percentage, and if your top player is worth 15% of what that is, then I think you need to you need to get comfortable with that as the cap goes up, because it's driven by the actual numbers. So the league is saying this is what you should be able to afford, and this is the max. So I get why the league is taking a little bit, like it's hard. The Kaprizov deals are maybe not right around the corner, but it's I mean that's the reality. That's where the cap's going, and that's where these players should get paid, and they should be doing more like the NBA. They should be doing short-term deals and getting theirs when they can, because it's it only lasts so long, and the cap's going to continue to go up. So they should all I guess I'm at the mentality that you got to get cheers a little bit too. So.
Change of the times or get left in the dust, and I think a couple GMs are going to find that out real quick, especially with some of the money these teams have.
Yeah, I think it's the GMs, but I think it comes down to the owner, right? Like it's. Yes, 100%. I think it's like, what can I want to offer this? Are you comfortable with this? And I think that's, I think it's up to the GM to justify those reasons, and that's what Danny Wirtz has said, and we'll see if that's all legit too. And but the team that Kyle Davidson is building, I think, over the next 3 to 5 years, like I think there could be multiple guys making 10+ million. Like that's just the reality. Like you're drafting this many higher players, and if they pan out, then it's completely justified. So I do think at some point you need role players, and you need guys that are making 3 or 4 million type money. Even those guys are going to be I think those type of players, as the cap goes up, some of those players will make more money too. Like it's not always gonna be like $1 million guys, and certainly entry level deals, all those things will come into play. But I think the Blackhawks over the stretch here, they have a lot of players who can potentially break out, and they're all going to be looking for theirs, and they're going to base it on where the cap's at, not at where it was. So it'll be interesting to see how it all comes together.
Definitely.
Yeah, that's
think I'm
all
good
I
on
got.
questions. What about you, Pierce?
Yeah.
Thank you
Yeah,
so
no,
much.
I'm-
Yeah,
This
no
has been
problem. Thanks for having me.
Great.
Yeah, see you, Scott. Thanks for
Oh,
coming
thanks,
on. It's
guys.
always a pleasure.
Take care.